The dust-coated window of Bramble Creek's general store reflected Virginia Sommers' weary eyes as another round of stifled laughter echoed behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know the Lawson sisters were watching her, whispering those same cruel observations they'd been making since she'd arrived in this frontier town 3 months ago. Plain as an unbuttered biscuit, dull as dishwater. The words stung even more today, on her 22nd birthday, as she tried to find anything to make herself feel special among the store's meager selection of ribbons and fabrics. Virginia tightened her grip on her worn leather purse. 1876 was supposed to be her year of reinvention, not another chapter of the same story she'd lived back in Boston. After her parents' passing, she'd gathered what little they'd left her and traveled west with dreams of a new beginning. Instead, she'd found the same dismissive glances, the same painful reminder that she was utterly forgettable. "Miss Sommers," Mrs. Holloway called from behind the counter. "Will you be purchasing something today, or just admiring the goods?" Virginia's cheeks flushed. "I'll take 3 yards of this calico, please." She selected a practical brown fabric, though her fingers had been drawn to a vibrant blue that matched the summer sky. Practical was best for a schoolteacher's salary. The bell above the door jingled, and the entire store seemed to hold its breath as Owen Campbell strode in, trail dust clinging to his boots and the brim of his Stetson casting a shadow over eyes the color of warm whiskey. Even Virginia couldn't help but stare. Everyone knew Owen Campbell, the most successful cattle rancher in the county at just 28 years old, handsome in a way that made women forget their manners, and as unreachable as the stars themselves. "Afternoon, ladies," he nodded, his voice carrying the slight drawl he'd picked up from his Texas-born father. The Lawson sisters immediately fluttered around him like butterflies to a flame, their voices rising an octave as they greeted him. Virginia turned back to her fabric, counting out her coins carefully. She had no business dreaming about men like Owen Campbell. Men like him married women who turned heads, not plain schoolteachers who blended into wallpaper. "Miss Virginia," Mrs. Holloway said, breaking into her thoughts, "don't forget your mail. Came in on yesterday's stage." Virginia accepted the envelope, recognizing her aunt's neat penmanship. "Thank you." As she gathered her purchases, the Lawson sisters' voices carried through the store. "Did you hear? The town dance is next Saturday," Eliza Lawson said, twirling a golden curl around her finger. "You'll be attending, won't you, Mr. Campbell?" Virginia moved toward the door, eager to escape before she had to witness Owen's inevitable acceptance of whatever invitation was being extended. But as she reached for the handle, her paper-wrapped bundle slipped from her grasp, spilling her new fabric and mail across the floor. "Allow me," came a deep voice, and suddenly Owen Campbell was kneeling beside her, gathering her belongings. "Thank you," she murmured, avoiding his eyes, "but I can manage." "I'm sure you can, Miss Sommers," he replied, standing with her package neatly assembled in his hands. "But my mother raised me to help a lady when I can." The Lawson sisters had gone silent, watching the exchange with poorly concealed irritation. "Really, Owen," Eliza sighed, using his first name with presumptuous familiarity. "Why waste your time? Virginia's far too plain to appreciate a gentleman's attention." The store fell deadly quiet. Virginia wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. The humiliation burned like fire in her chest. Owen Campbell turned slowly, his expression unreadable as he faced Eliza Lawson. "Plain," he repeated, his voice carrying easily in the silent store. "Miss Sommers." He turned back to Virginia, his gaze sweeping over her simple blue dress, her chestnut hair pulled back in a sensible bun, her face bare of any cosmetics or artifice. Virginia braced herself for his agreement or, worse, his pity. Instead, his lips curved into a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Plain as sunshine, I'd say, and just as essential." The whispers started immediately, but Owen seemed unbothered as he handed Virginia her package. "Would you allow me to walk you home, Miss Sommers?" Virginia found herself nodding, too stunned to form words. As they stepped out into the dusty main street of Bramble Creek, she finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that, Mr. Campbell. I'm quite accustomed to the Lawson sisters' opinions." Owen adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "That doesn't make them right." He glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, my father used to say that there are two kinds of beauty in this world. The kind that flashes like lightning quick and blinding but gone in an instant, and the kind that shines steady like sunshine, warming everything it touches." Virginia felt her cheeks grow warm. "And which am I supposed to be?" "I think you know," he replied softly. "The lightning gets all the attention, but it's the sunshine that grows the crops, Miss Sommers." They walked in silence for a moment, passing the blacksmith's shop where the rhythmic pounding of metal on metal filled the air. "I hear you're the new schoolteacher," Owen said finally. "How are you finding Bramble Creek?" Virginia considered her answer carefully. "It's different from Boston. Smaller. More honest, perhaps." "Honest?" Owen chuckled. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." "I meant that nature doesn't hide its intentions here," she clarified. "A storm announces itself. The heat doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. People, on the other hand—" She trailed off, suddenly aware she might be saying too much. "People are the same everywhere," Owen finished for her. "Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between." They reached the small boarding house where Virginia rented a room, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Campbell." "Owen," he corrected. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Sommers." "Virginia," she offered in return, surprising herself. He smiled again, and Virginia felt something flutter in her chest, a dangerous feeling she quickly suppressed. Men like Owen Campbell didn't court women like her. Today had been an anomaly, a moment of kindness she shouldn't misinterpret. "Virginia," he repeated as if tasting the name. "Would you consider attending the town dance with me next Saturday?" The question hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Virginia was certain she'd misheard. "Mr. Campbell, you don't need to." "I'm not asking out of obligation," he interrupted gently. "I'm asking because I'd like to know you better." Before Virginia could formulate a response, the boarding house door opened, and Mrs. Garrett, the owner, appeared on the porch. "Miss Sommers, and Mr. Campbell, what a pleasant surprise. Would you care to join us for tea?" Owen tipped his hat politely. "Another time, perhaps. I have business to attend to." He turned back to Virginia. "Saturday? I'd call for you at 7. With Mrs. Garrett watching curiously, Virginia found herself nodding. "Saturday, then." As Owen walked away, Mrs. Garrett bustled down the steps, her eyes wide with excitement. "Virginia Sommers. Do you know who that was?" Virginia couldn't help but smile. "Yes, Mrs. Garrett. I believe I do." The week passed in a blur of anticipation and doubt. Virginia spent her days teaching the children of Bramble Creek their letters and numbers, and her evenings alternating between excitement and certainty that Owen Campbell would change his mind. By Saturday morning, she had convinced herself he wouldn't come, that it had all been an elaborate joke orchestrated by the Lawson sisters. Still, at precisely 6 o'clock, she found herself soaking in a bath scented with the lavender oil she'd been saving for a special occasion. At 6:30, she put on her best dress, a dark green that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes, and carefully arranged her hair, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. At 5 minutes to 7, Mrs. Garrett knocked on her door. "He's here, dear, and looking more handsome than any man has a right to." Virginia took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one last time, and descended the stairs. Owen Campbell stood in the small parlor, his usual trail clothes replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark waistcoat, and polished boots. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Virginia felt beautiful. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you." She accepted the small bouquet of wildflowers he offered. "These are beautiful. I can't take credit. My foreman's wife insisted I shouldn't arrive empty-handed." Virginia smiled, appreciating his honesty. "Then please thank her for me." The town hall had been transformed for the dance, with lanterns casting a warm glow over the wooden floor and bunting draped from the rafters. A small band played in the corner, and nearly everyone in Bramble Creek seemed to be in attendance. As they entered, the conversations dimmed, and all eyes turned toward them. Virginia felt the weight of the stairs, heard the whispers begin. "Ignore them," Owen murmured, placing his hand lightly on the small of her back. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." Virginia nodded, though her stomach tightened with anxiety. The Lawson sisters stood near the refreshment table, their matching expressions of shock almost comical. "Would you care to dance?" Owen asked, drawing her attention back to him. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced," Virginia admitted. "Neither am I," he replied with a grin. "We'll stumble through it together." And they did. Owen led her through a waltz, his steps sure despite his claims of inexperience. Virginia gradually relaxed, focusing on the music and the warmth of his hand at her waist rather than the curious onlookers. "So tell me about Boston," Owen said as they moved across the floor. "What made you leave?" Virginia hesitated. "After my parents died, there wasn't much to keep me there. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere I could be useful." "And are you finding Bramble Creek useful for your fresh start?" "The children need a teacher," she replied, avoiding a direct answer. "And I needed a purpose." It seemed a fair exchange. Owen studied her face. "That's not quite what I asked." Virginia met his gaze. "Truth be told, I'm not sure yet. Bramble Creek is still deciding what to make of me, I think." "And what about me?" Owen asked, his voice dropping lower. "What do you make of me, Virginia Sommers?" The music ended before she could answer, saving her from having to form words around the confused tangle of her thoughts. As they moved off the dance floor, Mayor Thompson approached, clapping Owen on the shoulder. "Campbell, good to see you joining in the festivities. And Miss Sommers, a pleasure as always." The mayor's wife appeared at his side, her curious gaze flickering between Virginia and Owen. "Miss Sommers, I was just telling Eliza and Catherine Lawson how impressed we all are with your dedication to the schoolchildren. Such important work for a young woman with no other attachments." The implication was clear, and Virginia forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I find it very fulfilling." "Well, youth is fleeting," the older woman continued with faux sympathy. "It's good you've found something to occupy yourself." Owen's hand returned to Virginia's back, a subtle show of support. "If you'll excuse us, I believe I promised Miss Sommers some refreshment." He guided her away, leaning close to murmur in her ear. "I apologize for Mrs. Thompson. She means well, but tact isn't her strong suit." "You don't need to apologize for others," Virginia said quietly. "I'm used to it." "That's what concerns me," Owen replied. "You shouldn't have to be used to people treating you as though you're somehow less." They reached the refreshment table, and Owen handed her a cup of punch. The Lawson sisters had moved to the other side of the room, but their glares followed Virginia's every movement. "You still haven't answered my question?" Owen reminded her after they'd sipped their drinks in companionable silence. "What do you make of me?" Virginia considered the man before her successful, respected, handsome enough to have his pick of any woman in the county. "I think you're kind," she said finally. "Kinder than you need to be." And I think you enjoy defying expectations. Owen raised an eyebrow. Is that what you think this is? Me defying expectations by escorting the plain schoolteacher to the dance. The words stung, though Virginia knew he was only echoing others' perceptions. Isn't it? No, he said firmly. It isn't. Before he could elaborate, the band struck up another tune, and several couples moved to the dance floor. Shall we? Owen offered his hand, and Virginia took it, pushing aside her doubts for the moment. As the evening progressed, Virginia gradually relaxed, even laughing when Owen deliberately exaggerated his steps during a lively reel. By the time they left the town hall, walking back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Virginia felt lighter than she had in months. I enjoyed myself tonight, she admitted as they reached the front steps. Thank you. Owen took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. As did I. Would you allow me to call on you again? Perhaps for a picnic tomorrow after church. Virginia hesitated, the doubts rushing back. Mr. Campbell, Owen, you don't need to. I mean, I understand if tonight was Virginia, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking out of obligation or pity or any other reason except that I enjoy your company and would like to continue enjoying it. Is that so difficult to believe? Put that way, it seems simple. Yet Virginia had learned early that life was rarely simple, especially for women who didn't fit society's mold of beauty or charm. Yes, she answered honestly. It is difficult to believe. Owen stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his brown eyes, even in the dim light of the porch lantern. Then I'll just have to keep proving it until you believe me. Before Virginia could respond, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both old-fashioned and thrilling. Tomorrow, after the service. Virginia nodded, suddenly unable to form words. Good night, then, Virginia Sommers. Sweet dreams. As she watched him walk away, Virginia touched the spot on her hand where his lips had been, wondering if perhaps Bramble Creek might become home after all. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect September day. Virginia dressed carefully for church, choosing a pale blue dress that her mother had always said brought out the warmth in her complexion. As she pinned her hair, she found herself humming one of the tunes from the previous night's dance. Mrs. Garrett noticed immediately when Virginia came downstairs. Well, don't you look cheerful this morning? I take it your evening with Mr. Campbell was pleasant. Virginia smiled. It was, thank you. And will there be a second outing? The older woman prodded, her eyes twinkling. We're having a picnic after church, Virginia admitted, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Garrett clapped her hands together. Wonderful. That man needs a good woman in his life, especially with that big empty house of his. All that success and no one to share it with it isn't natural. Virginia's smile faltered. Mrs. Garrett, it's just a picnic. I wouldn't read too much into it. Of course, dear, the landlady replied, though her knowing smile suggested she was already planning the wedding breakfast. Now, we'd best hurry or we'll be late for Reverend Porter's sermon. The small white church at the end of Bramble Creek's main street was already filling with townspeople when Virginia and Mrs. Garrett arrived. Virginia slid into a pew near the back, her eyes automatically scanning the congregation for Owen's tall figure. Looking for someone? Came a familiar voice, and Virginia turned to find Owen sliding into the space beside her, his Bible tucked under one arm. Good morning, she greeted him, very aware of the curious glances being cast their way. I didn't realize you attended this church. Every Sunday, unless I'm away on business, he confirmed. Though I usually sit with my foreman and his family. He nodded toward a pew where a middle-aged couple sat with two teenage boys. John and Martha Donovan. They've been with me since I started the ranch. Before Virginia could respond, the Reverend called the congregation to prayer, and she bowed her head, though her thoughts were more focused on the man beside her than on spiritual matters. Throughout the service, Virginia was acutely aware of Owen's presence, the clean scent of his soap, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed against hers, the deep timbre of his voice as he joined in the hymns. It was a novel sensation, this heightened awareness of another person, and Virginia wasn't entirely sure what to make of it. After the final blessing, they made their way outside, where Owen was immediately surrounded by men wanting to discuss cattle prices and grazing rights. He excused himself politely, promising to catch up with them later. "Ready for that picnic?" he asked Virginia, offering his arm. She nodded, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. "Where are we going?" "I know a spot by the creek that's quiet and shaded," Owen replied. "I took the liberty of having Martha pack us a basket." They walked away from the church, past the curious stares and whispered comments. Virginia held her head high, determined not to show how affected she was by the attention. "They'll get used to it," Owen said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. "Small towns take time to adjust to change. Is that what we are? A change?" Owen glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. "I hope so. Don't you?" The question hung between them as they continued walking, leaving the town behind and following a well-worn path that meandered alongside Bramble Creek itself. The water burbled over rocks, creating a soothing background to their conversation as Owen pointed out various plants and wildlife. "Here we are," he said finally, indicating a grassy clearing beneath a massive oak tree. The spot offered a perfect view of the creek, with dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves overhead. From his saddlebag, which he'd somehow retrieved while Virginia wasn't looking, Owen produced a blanket and spread it on the ground. The picnic basket revealed an impressive array of food: cold chicken, freshly baked bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of preserves. "Martha outdid herself," Virginia commented as Owen arranged the feast between them. "She's been trying to fatten me up for years," he replied with a grin. "Says a man my height should be wider." Virginia laughed, finding it hard to imagine Owen any different than he was tall and lean, with the wiry strength that came from hard work rather than idleness. As they ate, Owen told her about his ranch, the struggles of his early years, the satisfaction of watching it grow, his plans for the future. Virginia found herself captivated by his passion and determination. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "Did you always want to be a teacher?" Virginia considered the question. "Not always. When I was very young, I wanted to be an explorer, discovering new lands and peoples." She smiled at the memory. "My father was a professor of history, and he'd tell me stories of ancient civilizations and distant places." "What changed?" "Reality," Virginia said simply. "I discovered that the world doesn't offer many opportunities for female explorers. Teaching was a respectable alternative that still allowed me to work with young minds, to help shape their understanding of the world." Owen watched her face as she spoke. "You're good at it. The children adore you. My foreman's younger boy, Tommy, talks about Miss Sommers constantly at dinner." The compliment warmed her. "They're good children, eager to learn. Like their teacher was, I imagine." Virginia nodded, pleased that he understood. They lapsed into comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the birds singing in the trees above. "May I ask you something personal?" Owen said eventually. Virginia looked up from where she'd been absently trailing her fingers through the grass. "You can ask. I might not answer." He smiled at her candor. "Fair enough. I was wondering why you've allowed people like the Lawson sisters to define you." The question caught her off guard. "I don't understand." "You referred to yourself as plain, as if you've accepted their judgment as fact," Owen explained. "I'm wondering why." Virginia stared at him, unsure how to respond. No one had ever questioned her self-perception before. "It's not just the Lawson sisters," she said finally. I've never been. I mean, I don't have the kind of beauty that turns heads. According to whom? According to everyone, she replied, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. Owen, I'm not blind. I know what I look like. I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm not offering empty flattery, he countered. I'm questioning why you've accepted other people's limited definition of beauty as the only valid one. Virginia blinked, taken aback by his persistence. I don't know how to answer that. Owen leaned forward, his expression earnest. Look at this, he said, gesturing to the creek and the trees surrounding them. Most people would call this beautiful, right? But it's not showy or dramatic. It's quiet beauty, steady, enduring. Are you comparing me to a creek? He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I'm saying that beauty isn't just one thing. It's not just perfect features or a tiny waist or golden curls. It's in how someone moves through the world, how they treat others, the light in their eyes when they talk about something they love. Virginia felt her cheeks grow warm under his intense gaze. You hardly know me. I'm getting to know you, he corrected. And I like what I'm discovering. The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in Virginia's chest, a dangerous feeling, a hope she wasn't sure she should nurture. Men like Owen Campbell didn't fall in love with women like her. They might be kind, might even find them interesting for a time, but eventually, they married women who enhanced their social standing, who graced their homes with conventional beauty and charm. Tell me about your ranch, she said, deliberately changing the subject. You mentioned expansion plans? Owen allowed the shift, though his knowing smile suggested he understood exactly what she was doing. As he described his vision for the Campbell Ranch, Virginia found herself drawn into his enthusiasm, asking questions and offering observations that seemed to please him. The afternoon passed quickly, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon before either of them noticed the time. I should get you back, Owen said reluctantly, gathering the remains of their picnic. Mrs. Garrett will be wondering where you've disappeared to. Mrs. Garrett is probably at her sister's for Sunday dinner, as she is every week, Virginia replied, helping him fold the blanket. But you're right, it's getting late. They walked back toward town, their pace unhurried, both seemingly reluctant for the day to end. When they reached the boarding house, Owen stopped at the bottom of the steps. Thank you for today, he said, his eyes warm as they met hers. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed an afternoon so much. Neither can I, Virginia admitted. Thank you for the invitation. Owen reached out, gently taking her hand in his. Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you again? Perhaps dinner at the hotel restaurant on Tuesday evening. Virginia knew she should be cautious, should guard her heart against inevitable disappointment. Instead, she found herself nodding. I'd like that. His smile could have lit the darkening sky. Tuesday, then. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, she confirmed. Owen lifted her hand and, as he had the night before, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Until Tuesday, Virginia Sommers. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset, and wondered what exactly she was getting herself into. The next morning, Virginia arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual, needing the quiet to organize her thoughts before facing her students. The single-room building sat at the edge of town, its whitewashed walls and small bell tower a symbol of Bramble Creek's aspirations toward civilization. Inside, Virginia moved between the rows of desks, arranging primers and slates for the day's lessons. Teaching had always centered her, given her purpose when other aspects of life seemed uncertain. Today, she hoped it would provide the same clarity. The sound of approaching horses drew her to the window. To her surprise, she saw Owen dismounting in front of the schoolhouse, leading a second horse laden with what appeared to be books. Virginia stepped onto the porch as he tied both horses to the hitching post. "Good morning. This is unexpected." Owen tipped his hat, his smile warm in the early light. "Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting your preparations." "Not at all, but what brings you here? And what's all this?" She gestured to the packed saddlebags. "Books," he replied, beginning to unload them. "For the school. I remembered you mentioning that the library here was somewhat lacking." Virginia stared at the growing stack of volumes: history books, novels, scientific texts, even a collection of maps bound in leather. "Where did these come from?" "My father's collection, mostly. They've been gathering dust since he passed. I thought they might be of more use here." The gesture left Virginia momentarily speechless. Books were precious on the frontier, expensive to ship and considered luxuries by many. Yet Owen had brought dozens, easily doubling the school's meager library. "This is incredibly generous," she managed finally. "The children will be thrilled." "And their teacher?" Owen asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Virginia laughed, running her fingers reverently over a volume of Shakespeare's collected works. "Their teacher might be even more excited than they are." Together, they carried the books inside, arranging them on the previously half-empty shelves at the back of the classroom. Virginia couldn't help but exclaim over particular titles, her enthusiasm drawing amused glances from Owen. "I take it I chose well?" "Perfectly," she assured him. "Though I'm not sure the younger children will appreciate Plutarch just yet." "Something to aspire to, then," Owen replied, placing the final book on the shelf. "I should let you get back to your preparations. The students will be arriving soon." Virginia nodded, though she found herself reluctant to see him go. "Thank you again. This means more than I can express." "You're very welcome." Owen hesitated, then added, "I was thinking, the cattle drive to Fort Worth leaves next week. I'll be gone for about 10 days. Would you write to me while I'm away?" The request surprised her. "Write to you. I'd like to know how the books are being received," he explained, though his smile suggested there was more to it than that. "And I'd miss our conversations." Virginia felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'd be happy to write to you." "Good," he said simply. "I'll look forward to your letters, then." The sound of children's voices approached from outside, signaling the imminent start of the school day. "That's my cue," Owen said, moving toward the door. "Until tomorrow evening, Virginia." "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching as he stepped outside, greeting several of her students by name as they passed him on their way into the schoolhouse. The day passed in a blur of activity, the new books causing much excitement among the 20-odd children who attended the Bramble Creek school. Virginia found herself constantly distracted by thoughts of Owen, his thoughtfulness, his interest in her opinions, the way his eyes seemed to see beyond the surface to something in her that others missed. By the time she dismissed the children that afternoon, Virginia had come to a decision. She would allow herself to enjoy Owen's attention for as long as it lasted, without expectations of something more permanent. It was a practical compromise between guarding her heart and denying herself the pleasure of his company altogether. That evening, as she sat at her small desk writing lesson plans, Virginia was interrupted by a knock at her door. "There's a package for you, dear," Mrs. Garrett called through the wood. "From Campbell Ranch, by the look of it." Curious, Virginia opened the door to find her landlady holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Thank you," she said, accepting the package. Mrs. Garrett lingered, clearly hoping to discover its contents, but Virginia merely smiled and closed the door gently but firmly. Alone again, she carefully untied the string and unwrapped the paper to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal and a small note in Owen's bold handwriting. "For your thoughts, whether you choose to share them or keep them private. Until tomorrow. O.C." Virginia ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtful gift. It had been years since anyone had given her a present that wasn't purely practical. Opening the journal, she found the pages blank and inviting, waiting for her words. Without overthinking it, she dipped her pen in ink and began to write, "Dear Owen, thank you for the journal. It's beautiful, and I promise to use it well." The books were a tremendous hit with the children today. Tommy Donovan, in particular, was fascinated by the atlas. He spent his entire lunch hour tracing the route from Texas to New York with his finger. "I find myself looking forward to tomorrow evening more than I should probably admit in writing. There's something freeing about your company, as though I can be myself without apology or explanation. Until tomorrow, Virginia." She stared at the words she'd written, wondering if they revealed too much. After a moment's hesitation, she carefully tore out the page, folded it, and sealed it with a drop of wax from her candle. She would have one of the older students deliver it to the Campbell Ranch in the morning. Tuesday dawned with leaden skies and the promise of rain, matching Virginia's sudden attack of nerves. By afternoon, she was seriously considering sending a note to cancel their dinner, convinced that the entire town would be watching and judging their growing friendship. But as the final bell rang and the children scattered toward home, the rain cleared, leaving behind that particular golden light that follows a storm. It seemed like a sign, and Virginia decided to honor her commitment, regardless of her anxieties. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at the boarding house door. Virginia descended the stairs in her best dress, the same dark green she'd worn to the dance, but paired with a cream-colored shawl that had been her mother's. Owen stood in the parlor, hat in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. The realization that he might be just as uncertain about this connection between them was oddly comforting. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." It was an understatement. In his dark suit and crisp white shirt, Owen cut a striking figure that would turn heads anywhere, not just in Bramble Creek. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and Virginia placed her hand on it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his jacket. The Bramble Creek Hotel was the town's only real restaurant, occupying the ground floor of the two-story building. As Owen led Virginia inside, she was acutely aware of the other diners' curious glances. The Lawson sisters were seated near the window with their parents, and their expressions of shocked disbelief would have been comical under different circumstances. Owen seemed oblivious to the attention as he pulled out Virginia's chair at a table set with the hotel's best china and linens. A small vase of wildflowers sat in the center, adding a touch of color to the white tablecloth. "I received your note," Owen said once they were settled. "I'm glad the children are enjoying the books." "They are. In fact, I had to establish a new rule that they can't read during arithmetic lessons." Owen laughed. "A good problem to have, I'd say." Their conversation flowed easily as they ordered and ate, moving from books to music to childhood memories. Virginia found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought about in years, her father teaching her to identify constellations from their Boston rooftop, her mother's patient lessons at the piano, her first day teaching in a small school outside of Cambridge. "Why did you leave teaching in Massachusetts?" Owen asked as they finished their meal. "It seems you were well established there." Virginia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "After my parents died, the house had to be sold to settle their debts. I stayed with my aunt for a while, but it wasn't ideal. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Bramble Creek, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start." Owen studied her face, seeming to sense there was more to the story. "And has it been a fresh start?" "It's getting there," Virginia replied with a small smile. "The first few months were difficult. I was homesick, and the town wasn't exactly welcoming to a spinster schoolteacher from the East." "Their loss," Owen said firmly, "and the word spinster should be banned from the English language." It makes being unmarried sound like some kind of moral failing rather than a circumstance. Virginia laughed, surprised by his vehemence. You sound like my father. He always said that marriage should be a choice, not an obligation. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was... Virginia agreed, a touch of sadness coloring her voice. I miss his guidance, especially at times like... She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. Times like what? Owen prompted gently. Virginia met his gaze. Times like now, when I'm not sure what path I'm on or where it leads. The honesty of her answer seemed to touch him. Owen reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I'm not entirely sure either, he admitted. But I'm enjoying the journey. The quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of dessert apple pie with fresh cream, a specialty of the hotel's cook. As they ate, their conversation turned to lighter topics, though Virginia remained aware of the undercurrent of connection between them, stronger with each meeting. After dinner, Owen suggested a walk, despite the muddy streets left by the afternoon's rain. They strolled through the town, arm in arm, eventually finding themselves at the small park where Bramble Creek held its 4th of July celebrations and summer band concerts. I leave for the cattle drive on Monday, Owen said as they sat on a bench beneath a large maple tree. 10 days on the trail to Fort Worth, then another 3 or 4 days of business before heading back. Virginia nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment at the thought of his absence. It sounds like hard work. It is, but there's something satisfying about it too, moving the herd across the open country, sleeping under the stars, the camaraderie of the men. He glanced at her. I'll miss our conversations, though. You'll have my letters, she reminded him. Yes, I will, Owen smiled. And I'll treasure every word. In the fading light, his expression was soft, his eyes warm as they met hers. Virginia felt herself leaning toward him almost involuntarily, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. Owen's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. May I? He asked, his voice low. Virginia nodded, her heart racing as he closed the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss so tender it made her chest ache, a question and an answer all at once, a promise of something neither of them had yet defined. When they drew apart, Owen's expression was one of wonder. I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you in the general store, standing so proudly despite the Lawson sisters' cruelty. Virginia's eyes widened. That long, he confirmed. Though I didn't have the courage to approach you until that day when you dropped your packages. I'm glad I'm clumsy then, she said with a small laugh. Owen shook his head. You're not clumsy. You're perfect. The words should have sounded trite, but the sincerity in his voice made them anything but. Virginia found herself believing him, if only for this moment under the maple tree with the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. We should head back, she said reluctantly. It's getting late. Owen nodded, rising and offering his hand to help her up. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined, each lost in their own thoughts. At the door, Owen turned to face her. I'd like to see you again before I leave. Perhaps dinner at the ranch on Sunday? You could meet the Donovans properly. See where I live. The invitation felt significant, a step beyond their previous outings. I'd like that, Virginia replied, meaning it. Owen's smile was like sunrise. I'll send the buggy for you at 4, then. He leaned down, pressing another soft kiss to her lips. Good night, Virginia. Sweet dreams. Good night, Owen, she whispered, watching as he walked away into the night. Inside, Virginia leaned against the closed door, touching her fingers to her lips where his kiss still lingered. Whatever happened next, whatever came of this unexpected connection, she knew one thing with certainty. She was falling in love with Owen Campbell. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet joy, like sunshine after a long winter. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and preparations for Owen's departure. Virginia threw herself into her teaching, trying not to count the hours until Sunday. On Thursday, a letter arrived for her at the school, a simple note from Owen expressing his anticipation for their dinner and updating her on the preparations for the cattle drive. Virginia read it 3 times before tucking it into her journal, alongside the blank pages waiting for her thoughts. That evening, she wrote back, sharing anecdotes from her classroom and confessing how much she was looking forward to seeing his ranch. Sunday arrived clear and bright, a perfect autumn day. Virginia dressed with extra care, choosing a rose-colored dress she'd made herself but had never worn, uncertain if the color suited her. Now, looking in the small mirror above her washstand, she decided it did, bringing warmth to her complexion and a hint of pink to her normally pale cheeks. At precisely 4 o'clock, a buggy pulled up in front of the boarding house. To Virginia's surprise, Owen himself was driving, rather than sending a ranch hand as he'd suggested. "I hope you don't mind," he said as he helped her into the seat beside him. "I wanted the chance to show you the countryside on the way." The drive to the Campbell Ranch took them through rolling hills dotted with oak and maple trees beginning to show their fall colors. Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early days in the territory, building his ranch from nearly nothing after his father's death. "It wasn't much when I started," he explained as they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling property below. "Just a small cabin and about 50 head of cattle. My father had the vision, but not the time to see it through." Virginia's eyes widened as she took in the scene. The ranch house was larger than she'd expected, a handsome 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Behind it stood a large barn, bunkhouse, corrals, and various outbuildings, all well-maintained and painted a uniform white with green trim. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "You've accomplished so much." Owen's expression was a mixture of pride and something like wistfulness. "It's a good start. There's still plenty to do." He guided the buggy down the hill and along a well-maintained road that led to the main house. As they approached, a middle-aged woman emerged onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "That's Martha Donovan," Owen explained. "She keeps the house running and makes sure I don't starve when I'm too busy to remember to eat." Martha greeted them warmly as Owen helped Virginia down from the buggy. "So you're the teacher we've heard so much about," she said, her eyes kind as they assessed Virginia. "Tommy talks of nothing else at dinner." "All good things, I hope," Virginia replied with a smile. "Nothing but praise," Martha assured her. "Now come inside. Owen's had me cooking since dawn for this dinner." The interior of the ranch house was as impressive as its exterior, spacious rooms furnished with a blend of practical frontier pieces and finer items that must have come from back east. The parlor featured a grand piano that caught Virginia's eye immediately. "Do you play?" Owen asked, noticing her interest. "I used to," she admitted. "My mother taught me, but it's been years since I had access to a piano." "You must play for us after dinner," he insisted. "Martha loves music." Before Virginia could protest, Martha ushered them into the dining room, where the table was set with fine china and crystal that glinted in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through large windows. "John and the boys will be joining us shortly," Martha explained as she directed them to their seats. "They're just finishing up the evening chores." As if on cue, the front door opened, and heavy footsteps announced the arrival of John Donovan and his sons. Virginia recognized Tommy, her student, who grinned widely when he saw her. "Miss Sommers, did you come to check if I've been doing my reading?" Virginia laughed. "Not at all, Tommy. I'm just here for dinner, like you." The meal that followed was one of the most enjoyable Virginia could remember. The food was delicious roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from Martha's garden, and homemade bread still warm from the oven. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the strained politeness or judgment she often encountered in town. John Donovan proved to be as kind as his wife, with a dry wit that had everyone laughing. His older son, Michael, was quiet but thoughtful, asking Virginia intelligent questions about the books she'd been teaching from. Tommy, as always, was full of energy and stories. Throughout the meal, Virginia found herself repeatedly meeting Owen's gaze across the table, each glance reaffirming the connection between them. He seemed different here, more relaxed and open, as though being on his own land allowed him to lower the guard he maintained in town. After dinner, despite her initial reluctance, Virginia was persuaded to play the piano. Her fingers were stiff at first, and used to the keys, but muscle memory soon took over as she played through several simple pieces her mother had taught her. "That was lovely," Martha said when she finished. "This house needs more music. It's too quiet most days." "Owen used to sing when he was younger," John commented, drawing a surprised look from Virginia. "Had a fine voice, too." Owen shook his head, though he was smiling. "Ancient history, John. I haven't sung in years." "Well, maybe you should start again," Martha suggested with a meaningful glance between Owen and Virginia that made them both blush. As the evening drew to a close, Owen suggested showing Virginia the rest of the property before taking her back to town. They said their goodbyes to the Donovans, with promises that Virginia would visit again soon. Outside, the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Owen led Virginia toward the barn, where he introduced her to his favorite horse, a magnificent black stallion named Thunderbolt. "He was a gift from my father," Owen explained as the horse nuzzled his palm for treats. "One of the last things he gave me before he died." Virginia stroked the horse's velvety nose. "You must have been very close to your father." "We were," Owen confirmed. "He taught me everything I know about ranching, about being a man. I just wish he could have seen what the ranch has become." "I think he would be very proud," Virginia said softly. Owen's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with emotion. "Thank you for that." They continued their tour, walking past the corrals where cattle waited for the drive that would begin the next morning. Owen explained the process, from gathering the herd to the long journey to the railheads or markets where the cattle would be sold. "It's not an easy life," he admitted as they stood watching the sunset from a small rise overlooking the ranch. "Lots of hard work, long hours, and risk. Drought, disease, rustlers, any number of things can wipe out a year's work in a moment." Virginia sensed he was telling her this for a reason beyond mere conversation. "But you love it anyway." "I do," he agreed. "There's a freedom to it, a connection to the land that becomes part of you." He turned to face her fully. "Virginia, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to understand what my life is, what it means to be part of this place." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Virginia's heart raced as she met his gaze. "I think I'm beginning to understand." Owen took her hands in his expression serious. "When I return from Fort Worth, I'd like us to continue what we've started here. Not just casual outings, but a proper courtship if you're willing." The word courtship sent a thrill through Virginia's chest. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Owen's smile was like sunrise breaking over the hills. He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her deeper than before, a promise sealed between them as the last light of day faded into dusk. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I should get you home before Mrs. Garrett sends out a search party." Virginia laughed softly. "She probably has the wedding planned already." "Is that so terrible a thought?" Owen asked, his voice light but his eyes serious. Virginia felt her cheeks warm. Not terrible at all, she admitted. Just unexpected. A month ago, I'd resigned myself to being Bramble Creek's spinster schoolteacher forever. And now I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm looking forward to finding out. The drive back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts yet comfortable in the silence they shared. When they reached the boarding house, Owen helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist. "I've left letters for you with John," he said. "One for each day I'm gone. It seemed fairer since you'll be writing to me." The gesture touched Virginia deeply. "That's very thoughtful. I didn't want you to think I'd forgotten you just because I was away." Owen tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I'll be thinking of you every day." "And I you," Virginia replied. "Be safe on the trail. Always." He kissed her once more, a brief but tender touch, before helping her up the steps to the door. "Good night, Virginia. I'll see you when I return." Virginia watched from the porch as he drove away, the buggy disappearing into the darkness. Only when she could no longer hear the horse's hooves did she turn and enter the boarding house, her heart full of a happiness she'd never expected to find in Bramble Creek. The next morning, Virginia woke early, drawn to her window by the sound of cattle and men's voices. In the pre-dawn light, she could just make out the Campbell herd being driven through the far end of town, heading south toward the Fort Worth Trail. Though she couldn't distinguish individual riders at this distance, she imagined Owen at the head of the procession, tall and straight in the saddle. "Safe journey," she whispered, pressing her palm to the glass. After breakfast, Virginia headed to the schoolhouse as usual. On her desk, she found a small envelope with her name written in Owen's bold hand. Inside was a brief note. "The first letter awaits you this afternoon. Until then, know that you are in my thoughts as surely as the sun rises. O.C." Virginia smiled, tucking the note into her pocket before her students began to arrive. Throughout the morning, she found her mind drifting to Owen, wondering where on the trail he might be now, whether he was thinking of her as she was of him. After dismissing the children for the day, Virginia was gathering her things when the door opened to reveal John Donovan, his hat in his hands. "Miss Sommers," he greeted her. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Donovan. Is everything all right?" John nodded, reaching into his jacket to produce an envelope. "Owen asked me to deliver this to you today. There'll be another tomorrow, and so on until he returns." Virginia accepted the letter, trying not to appear too eager. "Thank you for bringing it. It's no trouble." John hesitated, then added, "Miss Sommers, I don't mean to overstep, but I wanted you to know that Martha and I think very highly of you. We haven't seen Owen this happy in, well, perhaps ever." The unexpected endorsement warmed Virginia. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. That means a great deal coming from you." John nodded, clearly uncomfortable with emotional discussions but determined to make his point. "Owen's like a son to us. We want to see him settled with someone who appreciates him for who he is, not what he owns. I assure you, Mr. Donovan, Owen's ranch is the least of what I admire about him." This seemed to satisfy John, who nodded again and turned to leave. "Martha says to remind you that you're welcome at the ranch anytime, even with Owen away. Tommy would be pleased to show you his new calf." After John left, Virginia opened Owen's letter with trembling fingers. "My dearest Virginia, as I write this, it's Sunday evening, and you've just left after our dinner. The house seems emptier without your presence, though the memory of your music still lingers in the parlor. Tomorrow we begin the drive, but my thoughts are already racing ahead to my return. I meant what I said about a proper courtship. These past weeks have shown me what I've been missing in my life, not just companionship, but the particular joy that comes from sharing thoughts and dreams with someone who understands them. You asked once what I made of you. I didn't answer fully then, perhaps fearing I would reveal too much too soon. But now I want you to know. I see in you a strength that has nothing to do with physical power, an intelligence that seeks understanding rather than advantage, and a beauty that grows more profound with each meeting. The trail will be long, but knowing you await my return makes every mile worthwhile. Yours, Owen. Virginia read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in her journal. That evening, she wrote her reply, pouring out her feelings more freely than she had in person. Dear Owen, your letter found me well, though missing your company already. The school seems quieter somehow, despite 20 children making their usual commotion. I've been thinking about our conversation at the ranch, about understanding what your life means. I want you to know that I do understand, or at least, I'm beginning to. There's a purpose to what you've built, a legacy beyond mere possession. I admire that deeply. My own parents left me no property or wealth, but they gave me something perhaps more valuable. The belief that life should be lived with integrity and purpose. In you, I see those same values reflected. Be safe on your journey. Know that you are in my thoughts, as constantly as the turning of the earth. Yours, Virginia. The days fell into a pattern. Each afternoon, John or Martha would deliver one of Owen's letters, and each evening Virginia would write her reply. Through their correspondence, she came to know him in ways their brief time together hadn't allowed. His hopes for the ranch's future, memories of his childhood in Texas before his family moved north, his thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. In turn, Virginia shared more of herself than she ever had with anyone. Her struggles after her parents' deaths, her dreams beyond teaching, her fears of never finding a place where she truly belonged. On the 5th day after Owen's departure, Virginia was surprised to receive an invitation to Sunday dinner at the Campbell Ranch from Martha. The house is too quiet without the men, the note explained. We'd welcome your company. Virginia accepted gladly, finding unexpected friendship with Martha during her visit. The older woman showed her around the house more thoroughly than Owen had, including the kitchen garden she tended and the room that had been Owen's mother's sewing room. She died when he was just 12, Martha explained as they stood in the sunny space with its view of the distant hills. Consumption. His father never really recovered from the loss, though he did his best for Owen's sake. That explains a lot about him, Virginia said softly. His self-reliance, his determination. Martha nodded. He had to grow up fast, but he never lost his kindness, his sense of what's right. She glanced at Virginia. He needs someone who sees that, who values the man rather than the rancher. I do, Virginia assured her. Very much. By the time Owen was due to return, Virginia had received 10 letters, each more open and affectionate than the last. His final note, delivered the day before his expected arrival, contained a simple request. Meet me at the schoolhouse at sunset tomorrow? I'll come straight there from the trail. Virginia sent her agreement with John, who had become a friendly courier between them. All day Friday, she found herself watching the clock, counting the hours until Owen's return. Her students noticed her distraction, exchanging knowing glances when she had to ask Tommy to repeat a question she hadn't heard. When the final bell rang, Virginia dismissed the children but remained behind, straightening the classroom and changing into a fresh dress she'd brought with her. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, she sat at her desk, attempting to grade arithmetic papers, but finding her attention constantly drawn to the window. The sound of hoofbeats finally broke the silence. Virginia's heart leaped as she recognized Owen's tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. She moved to the doorway, watching as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. He looked different somehow, his skin darkened by 10 days in the sun, his movements betraying the fatigue of the trail, a growth of beard shadowing his jaw. But his eyes, when they found her, were the same, warm and focused entirely on her, as though nothing else existed in that moment. "Virginia," he said simply, crossing the distance between them in long strides. She stepped forward to meet him, propriety forgotten as she was swept into his embrace. Owen's arms tightened around her waist, lifting her slightly as he buried his face in her hair. "I missed you," he murmured against her temple. "Every day, every hour." "And I you," she replied, drawing back just enough to see his face. "Was your journey successful?" Owen nodded, his hands still resting at her waist. "Very. We got good prices for the cattle, better than I'd hoped. But all I could think about was getting back to you." The sincerity in his voice made Virginia's heart swell. She reached up, touching his bearded cheek gently. "You look tired." "Trail weary," he admitted, "but happy to be home." His eyes searched hers. "Your letters. They meant everything to me out there. Knowing you were here, thinking of me, writing to me. As yours did to me," Virginia said softly. "I kept them all in my journal." Owen smiled, the expression transforming his tired face. "I have something for you," he said, releasing her reluctantly to reach into his coat pocket. "I saw it in Fort Worth and thought of you immediately." He produced a small box, opening it to reveal a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a book, suspended on a fine chain. "Open it," he encouraged. Virginia carefully lifted the pendant, discovering that it was indeed a tiny book that opened to reveal minuscule pages. Squinting, she could just make out words engraved on the first page. "Plain as sunshine, mine forever." Tears sprang to her eyes as she recognized his words from their first real meeting. "Owen, it's beautiful. May I?" he asked, taking the necklace from her hands. Virginia turned, lifting her hair as he fastened the chain around her neck. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, catching the last rays of sunlight through the schoolhouse windows. When she turned back to face him, Owen's expression was serious, his eyes intent on hers. "Virginia, these past weeks, the time we've spent together, the letters we've exchanged, they've meant more to me than I can express." Virginia nodded, her own feelings too powerful for words. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, taking her hands in his. "By society's standards, we've barely begun to know each other. But I feel as though I've been waiting for you my entire life without realizing it." Virginia's heart raced as she recognized the direction of his words. "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I know you need time to be certain, and I respect that. But I want you to know my intentions, to understand that for me, this isn't casual or temporary." He took a deep breath, his thumbs tracing patterns on the backs of her hands. "I love you, Virginia Sommers. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I love the way you see the world and the way you've begun to see me not as the successful rancher or the eligible bachelor, but as the man beneath those labels." Virginia felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back, determined to hold his gaze as he continued. "When the time is right, when you're ready, I want to ask you to be my wife, to share my life, my home, my future." Owen's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "But for now, I'm asking only that you continue what we've begun. That you allow me to court you properly, to show you what a life together might be." The sincerity in his words left Virginia breathless. In Boston, she had received proposals before practical offers from men who saw her as suitable but not special, who valued her education and good family but never truly saw her. Owen's declaration was something entirely different, a recognition of her very self, an offering of his heart without demands or conditions. "Owen," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't need time to know how I feel. I love you too." The words, once spoken, seemed to release something in both of them. Owen pulled her close again, his kiss deep and thorough, conveying all the longing of their separation. Virginia responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she gave herself fully to the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Does that mean yes? To my courtship?" Virginia laughed softly. "Yes, to courtship and to the question you haven't formally asked yet." Owen's eyes widened. "You're sure? You don't want more time?" "I'm sure," Virginia replied simply. "I've never been more certain of anything." The joy that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with delight. When he set her down, his expression turned serious again. "In that case," he said, reaching into his pocket once more, "I have something else for you." He knelt on one knee, looking up at her with such love that Virginia felt her heart might burst. In his palm lay a ring, a simple but elegant design of silver set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Virginia Sommers," Owen said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you share my life, my home, my heart for as long as we both shall live?" "Yes," Virginia whispered, her vision blurring with tears. "Yes, Owen Campbell, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her again, a gentle, reverent touch that sealed their promise. "It was my mother's," he explained as Virginia admired the ring. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for the woman who would bring sunshine back into our home." The words touched Virginia deeply. "I'll try to be worthy of it, of her memory, and of your love." "You already are," Owen assured her, drawing her close again. "You've brought light back to my life in ways I never expected." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky, Virginia marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had arrived in Bramble Creek alone and uncertain, a plain schoolteacher seeking nothing more than independence and purpose. Now she stood in the arms of a man who saw her true self, who valued her precisely for the qualities others had dismissed. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, noticing her introspection. Virginia smiled up at him. "That sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and that plain isn't such a terrible thing to be, if it means being as essential as sunshine." Owen's answering smile was like coming home. "Plain as sunshine," he agreed, kissing her once more as night fell around them. "And mine forever." News of their engagement spread through Bramble Creek like wildfire. By Sunday morning, when they attended church together, Virginia's ring drawing curious glances, it seemed everyone in town had formed an opinion on the match. The Lawson sisters were predictably scandalized, their whispers barely concealed behind gloved hands. Others seemed genuinely pleased, especially those who knew Owen well or whose children Virginia taught. Martha and John Donovan beamed like proud parents when Owen formally announced their engagement to the ranch hands. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Owen insisted there was no need to wait, and Virginia, having no family to consult and no reason to delay, agreed to a December wedding. Martha took charge of the arrangements, enlisting Virginia's help but shouldering most of the work herself. "Consider it my gift to you both," she insisted when Virginia protested. "I've been waiting years to see that boy properly settled." November brought the first frost, painting the landscape in silver and transforming Bramble Creek into a glittering wonderland. Virginia continued teaching, though she had given notice that she would resign at the end of the term. The school board, while disappointed to lose her, had already begun advertising for a replacement. "Will you miss it?" Owen asked one evening as they sat before the fire in the ranch house parlor, going over plans for the wedding. "Teaching, I mean," Virginia considered the question thoughtfully. Parts of it, yes. The moment when a child understands something new, the satisfaction of watching them grow in knowledge and confidence. You could still teach, Owen suggested. Maybe not formally, but there are children on neighboring ranches who don't make it to town for school. You could offer lessons here if you wanted. The suggestion touched Virginia deeply, another example of how Owen sought to support her interests rather than subsume them into his own. I'd like that, she admitted. A small class, perhaps twice a week. Whatever you wish, Owen said, squeezing her hand. This will be your home too, Virginia. I want you to make it yours in every way. The day before their wedding dawned clear and cold, the December sky a brilliant blue above the frost-covered landscape. Virginia spent her final night at the boarding house, tradition dictating that she and Owen should not see each other until the ceremony. Mrs. Garrett, who had appointed herself Virginia's surrogate mother for the occasion, bustled about making last-minute adjustments to the wedding dress. They had created together a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk with pearl buttons down the back and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Garrett said, tears in her eyes as Virginia tried on the completed dress one last time. Absolutely radiant. Virginia smiled at her reflection, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back from the mirror. Was this truly the same person who had arrived in Bramble Creek less than a year ago, so certain of her own plainness? The woman in the mirror seemed transformed not by any dramatic change in her features, but by the confidence and joy that illuminated her from within. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Garrett, Virginia said, turning to embrace the older woman. You've been so kind to me from the beginning. Nonsense, Mrs. Garrett replied, though she returned the hug warmly. You've been a blessing to this town, Virginia Sommers. And tomorrow you'll be a blessing to that fine young man who had the sense to recognize what he'd found. That night, alone in her room for the last time, Virginia opened her journal and began to write. Tomorrow I become Virginia Campbell, wife to a man who sees me not as the world does, but as I truly am. I came to Bramble Creek seeking independence, a place to belong, a purpose beyond myself. I found all those things, but also something I had stopped believing was possible, a love that accepts me without reservation, that values my strengths and supports my dreams. Owen calls me his sunshine. Perhaps that is what love does, it illuminates us, revealing not just our flaws but our true nature, the essence of who we are beneath the labels others assign. In Owen's eyes, I am not plain but essential, not ordinary but extraordinary in the very ordinariness that others dismissed. Tomorrow begins a new chapter, a new life. I step into it not with fear or reservation, but with joy and gratitude for the unexpected path that led me here. The wedding itself was simple but beautiful, held in the white-clapboard church where they had sat side by side that first Sunday. Virginia walked down the aisle alone, her bouquet of winter roses and evergreen trembling slightly in her hands. But when she saw Owen waiting for her, tall and handsome in his new suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love and pride, her nervousness vanished. Dearly beloved, Reverend Porter began, his voice filling the small church. We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Virginia heard the familiar words as if from a distance, her attention focused entirely on Owen's face, on the warmth of his hands holding hers, on the promise they were making before God and their community. I, Owen, take thee, Virginia, to be my wedded wife. Owen's voice was clear and steady, his eyes never leaving hers. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I plight thee my troth. Virginia repeated the vows, her voice growing stronger with each word. her heart full to overflowing as Owen slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Porter concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Owen. "You may kiss your bride." Owen's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a beginning rather than an ending. As they turned to face the congregation, now introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Campbell, Virginia caught sight of faces both friendly and less so, the Donovans beaming with pride, Mrs. Garrett wiping away tears, the Lawson sisters watching with poorly concealed envy. But none of it mattered. What mattered was Owen's hand holding hers, the future stretching before them, the home they would build together. The reception that followed at the town hall was a joyous affair, with food and music and dancing that continued well into the evening. Virginia found herself passed from partner to partner for the traditional dances, receiving congratulations and good wishes from people who had barely acknowledged her existence months before. "Enjoying your day, Mrs. Campbell?" Owen asked, claiming her for a waltz as the evening wore on. The name still sounded new and wonderful to Virginia's ears. "More than I can express," she replied, following his lead across the floor. "Though I'm looking forward to going home." Owen's eyes darkened at her words, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. "As am I." "Very much." Their departure was marked by cheers and good-natured teasing, with rice thrown and calls for good fortune following them as Owen helped Virginia into the waiting buggy, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ranch hands. The drive to the ranch to their home passed in comfortable silence, both of them absorbing the momentous change in their relationship, the lifetime commitment they had just made. When they arrived, Owen surprised Virginia by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Campbell," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the entrance hall, now decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas season. "It feels like home already," Virginia replied, looking around at the house that would now be hers to manage, to fill with life and love. Later, in the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Virginia discovered another aspect of marriage, the physical expression of love that bound them together as surely as their vows. Owen's tenderness, his patience, his dedication to her pleasure made their first night together a beautiful beginning rather than an ordeal to be endured, as some of her married friends had whispered. "I love you," Owen murmured as they lay together afterward, his arms holding her close against the December chill. "My sunshine, my heart, my wife." "And I love you," Virginia replied, resting her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "My husband, my home, my forever." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Virginia and Owen built a life together that exceeded all her girlhood dreams, a partnership of equals, founded on mutual respect and deepening love. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Owen's mother, arrived just 10 months after their wedding, bringing new joy to their home. A son, James, followed 2 years later, and eventually another daughter, Sarah, completed their family. Virginia did indeed establish a small school on the ranch, teaching not only her own children but those from neighboring properties who couldn't easily reach town. Her reputation as an excellent educator spread, and eventually the county appointed her to the school board, where she advocated for improved educational opportunities for all children in the territory. Owen's ranch prospered under their joint management, Virginia's head, for figures complementing Owen's practical knowledge of cattle and land. They weathered the inevitable challenges together. Droughts, economic downturns, the changing landscape of the West as the frontier gradually gave way to civilization. Through it all, they remained each other's center, each other's home. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, Owen would sometimes turn to Virginia, his eyes still filled with the same wonder as on that first day in the general store. "Plain as sunshine," he would say, touching the book pendant she still wore. "And mine forever." And Virginia, her hand in his, would smile and reply, "Forever, my love, forever."